pretended to be broke to test my wife's loyalty, but the moment she started treating me like I was worthless, I realized the test was uncovering something far more dangerous than I expected. I was still the same man, still wealthy, still in control, but to her, I had become a failure overnight. And my wife, the woman who once promised to stand by me no matter what, started changing the second the money disappeared. At first, it was small, a look, a question, a silence that lasted too long. But then, it got worse. Because while I was watching her loyalty, she was quietly making choices behind my back. So tell me, what would you do if the person you trusted most only loved you when you had everything? And what happens when the broke husband she's ready to walk away from finally reveals who he really is? Daniel Carter knew the exact second his marriage ended. It wasn't when Emily packed her bags. It wasn't when she stopped wearing her wedding ring. It wasn't even when she started coming home late with excuses that didn't quite connect. No, it was much earlier. It was the moment she looked at him, really looked at him, and saw nothing worth staying for. I didn't sign up to suffer with a failure, Daniel. Her voice wasn't loud. That was what made it worse. It was calm, controlled, almost practiced, like she had rehearsed it in her mind long before she said it out loud. Daniel stood still in the middle of their small living room, a folded electricity bill in his hand. The paper had already been opened, read, and reread so many times that the edges were soft. Overdue. Final notice, disconnect warning. He had placed it on the table earlier, hoping maybe foolishly that they would face it together. Instead, Emily stood across from him, arms crossed, her expression tight with frustration. You said things would get better, she added, shaking her head slightly. Every week. It's the same story. Daniel didn't respond immediately, not because he didn't have anything to say, but because he was measuring something far more important than words: her tone, her patience, her limit. And silently, he marked it, because what Emily didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know, was that just 3 hours earlier, Daniel had approved a multi-million-dollar transfer between two of his offshore accounts. The notification was still sitting on his phone. Unread. Untouched. Irrelevant. For now, I'm trying, he said finally, his voice low, steady, carefully neutral. Emily let out a short, disbelieving laugh. Trying, she repeated. Daniel, trying doesn't pay bills. There was a pause, a small one, but in that pause, something shifted. Daniel noticed the way her eyes flicked, not at him, but at the window, where a sleek black car passed by outside. It was quick. Subtle. But it was there. And that was when the memory hit him. Flashback, foreshadowing. Step 3 months ago, at a restaurant, Emily had smiled as a man at the next table handed his wife a designer bag. Not jealousy. Not openly, but something quieter, a look that lingered just a second too long. Later that night, she had asked softly, "Do you ever wish you could give me more?" At the time, Daniel had brushed it off. Now, it echoed. Back in the present, Emily sighed and picked up her phone. "I can't keep doing this," she muttered. Daniel watched her, his face unreadable, but inside, something was unfolding with precision. Because this wasn't just a bad moment. This was data. Confirmation. A piece of a puzzle he had been quietly building. And the truth was, this wasn't happening by accident. It was happening exactly the way he had planned. Because weeks ago, long before the bills, before the tension, before the cracks, Daniel Carter had made a decision, a dangerous one. He was going to test his wife. Not with words. Not with questions. But with reality. Controlled fall, a carefully constructed collapse. And now, standing in that dim living room, watching the woman he loved slowly pull away, he realized something chilling. The test hadn't even reached its hardest phase yet, and she was already failing. Daniel didn't sleep that night. He lay still beside Emily, staring into the darkness as her breathing slowly evened out. Her back turned to him, another small shift that had quietly become routine. Weeks ago, she used to rest her head on his chest, tracing lazy circles on his arm, as they talked about nothing and everything. Now, there was space between them, not wide enough to notice at a glance, but wide enough to feel. Daniel's eyes remained open, but his mind had already slipped backward, pulled into a memory he had spent years trying to control, not erase, because forgetting was never the goal. Understanding was. He was 17 again, standing at the top of a staircase in a house that used to feel alive. Voices echoed below. His father's voice, once strong, commanding, now carried something unfamiliar. Strain. I trusted you, his father said, each word slower than the last. A woman's voice followed, sharp, defensive, but not surprised. You had money. I used it. That's how this works. Daniel had gripped the wooden railing, his knuckles tightening as the words sank in. There was no denial, no guilt, just truth, spoken without hesitation. That was the moment everything changed. Not when the accounts were emptied, not when the lawyers got involved, but when Daniel realized something far more dangerous. Some people don't pretend to love you. They simply stop pretending when the benefit disappears. The memory shifted. 3 months later, the house was quiet again, but this time, permanently. Daniel stood beside a hospital bed, staring at a man who looked nothing like the father he once knew. The strength was gone, the presence reduced to something fragile, something fading. His father's hand was cold when he reached for Daniel's. Listen to me, he whispered, his voice barely holding together. Never let money be the reason someone stays in your life. Daniel didn't respond. He couldn't, but he listened. Because if it is, his father continued, his breath uneven, you'll never know, as they would stay without it. That sentence didn't just land. It rooted itself deep, permanent. And when his father's hand finally went still, Daniel didn't cry, not immediately, because something else had already taken its place, a decision. The memory dissolved slowly, pulling him back into the present, the dim light of the bedroom, the quiet hum of a distant generator outside. Emily shifted slightly beside him, but didn't turn. Daniel exhaled quietly, his gaze drifting to the ceiling. Everything he had built since that moment, every company, every investment, every calculated move had one silent purpose beneath it all: control. Not just over money, but over outcomes. Over uncertainty, over people. And yet, here he was, testing the one thing he could never fully control, a person's loyalty. Emily had never known this part of him. To her, Daniel was steady, responsible, reliable, man who worked hard and came home tired. She had never seen the boardrooms. Never heard the negotiations, never watched him dismantle a $1 million deal with a single sentence. That life was separate. Intentionally. Because when Daniel met Emily, something about her felt different. She laughed easily. She didn't ask questions about money. She once told him, sitting on a park bench with nothing but street food between them, I don't need rich, I need real. That moment had mattered, more than she realized, but now, lying in the same bed, listening to the silence she no longer tried to fill, Daniel felt a quiet, unsettling thought begin to form. What if she believed that back then, but not anymore? And if that was true, when exactly did it change? Daniel met Emily on a day that felt too ordinary to matter, but somehow became the beginning of everything. It wasn't in a luxury setting or anything tied to the life he truly lived. It was at a small roadside cafe, the kind of place where people didn't ask questions and nobody cared what you drove or wore. Daniel had chosen that place deliberately. Even then, before Emily, before marriage, before love, he had already built the habit of separating his real world from the one people were allowed to see. Emily had been standing in line, arguing softly with the vendor over a wrong order, her voice polite but firm, refusing to be ignored, but never raising itself enough to cause a scene. That balance caught Daniel's attention before her beauty did. When she finally turned and their eyes met, she smiled, not the kind of smile that calculated value, but one that felt instinctive, unguarded. They always mix up the orders here, she said casually, as if they already knew each other. Daniel nodded slightly, studying her without making it obvious. And you still come back? He asked. She shrugged. Not everything has to be perfect to be worth it. That line stayed with him more than it should have. It felt simple, but something about it carried weight, like a principle she lived by rather than a random comment. That was the first moment Daniel felt something unfamiliar, curiosity without suspicion. As they began talking, something else became clear. Emily wasn't impressed by surface things. When he mentioned work, keeping it vague on purpose, she didn't press for details. When he joked about being just another guy trying to survive, she laughed instead of questioning it. That was rare. Most people probed. Most people measured. Emily didn't. Or at least, she didn't then. Their relationship built itself in quiet moments. Walks without destinations. Late-night conversations about childhood dreams and disappointments. Meals that were simple but shared with genuine presence. Daniel found himself relaxing in ways he hadn't in years. The part of him that was always calculating, always observing, slowly lowered its guard, but never completely. Because even in those early days, small things existed. Not red flags, not obvious, just details that didn't fully settle. There was the time they passed a jewelry store and Emily paused slightly, her gaze lingering on a display longer than necessary, before she quickly looked away and resumed talking like nothing happened. There was the evening they attended a friend's birthday, and she seemed unusually quiet after meeting someone who casually mentioned their luxury lifestyle. She hadn't said anything negative, hadn't complained, but Daniel noticed the shift. It was subtle, but it was there. At the time, he dismissed it. Everyone notices things. Everyone compares, even briefly. It didn't mean anything. Or at least, that's what he told himself. What mattered more was what she said, the words that built trust. One night, sitting under dim streetlights with the world quiet around them, Emily leaned her head lightly against his shoulder and said, "I don't care about money, Daniel. I've seen people chase it and lose everything that matters. I just want something real. Something that doesn't disappear when life gets hard." That moment didn't just touch him, it anchored him. It connected directly to something deep inside him, something shaped by loss, by betrayal, by a promise he made, without ever speaking it out loud. That was the moment Daniel made a silent decision. He wouldn't tell her the truth about his wealth. Not yet, because if what she said was real, it would remain real, regardless of what he had. And if it wasn't, then one day, he would find out. What Daniel didn't realize then was that the test had already begun long before he consciously decided to create one. And somewhere between those quiet moments and unspoken observations, something had already been set in motion, something neither of them fully understood yet. The first year of Daniel and Emily's marriage felt like proof that everything he had hoped for was real. It wasn't extravagant, and that was intentional. Daniel could have given her more, far more, but he chose restraint, not out of stinginess, but out of purpose. The apartment they moved into was clean, modest, and comfortable enough to build a life in, but nowhere near the standard of what he could actually afford. Emily had walked in on the first day, looked around slowly, then smiled in a way that felt genuine. "It's small," she said, setting her bag down, "but it feels like ours." That word mattered to Daniel. Ours. It suggested partnership, not dependence. For a while, everything aligned with that idea. They built routines together. Grocery shopping became something they did side by side, occasionally arguing playfully over unnecessary items. "We don't need this," Daniel would say, holding up something extra. Emily would grin and reply, "We don't need a lot of things, but life would be boring without them." He would usually give in, not because of the item, but because of the ease between them. At night, they would sit close on the couch, sometimes talking, sometimes not, comfortable in the silence that didn't demand filling. Those moments reassured him. They felt stable, real, but even in stability, patterns form, and Daniel had trained himself to notice patterns before they became problems. It started subtly, almost too small to question. Emily began asking more about his work, not in a curious way, but in a slightly concerned one. "So, do you see yourself growing there?" she asked one evening, her tone light, but her eyes searching. Daniel leaned back slightly, careful with his answer. "Eventually. It takes time," she nodded. but didn't respond immediately. That pause lingered longer than it used to. A few weeks later, during a visit to a mall, Emily slowed her steps as they passed a high-end store. She didn't stop, didn't point, didn't ask, but her pace changed. Daniel matched it without commenting. Inside, he marked it. Another small detail. Another quiet shift. The contrast between what he knew and what he showed her was growing, but still controlled. Behind the scenes, Daniel's real life continued untouched. Meetings held in private offices under different names. Financial movements executed through layers designed to remain invisible. Assistants who knew him only in fragments. He had built a system where his wealth existed, but not in a way that could easily reach him in this version of his life. It wasn't just about hiding money. It was about creating a reality that could withstand scrutiny. Because if the illusion cracked too easily, the test would be meaningless. One evening, as they sat at dinner, Emily scrolled briefly through her phone, then locked it and looked up. "Do you ever think about where we'll be in 5 years?" she asked. Daniel met her gaze. "Yeah," he said. "I think about it." "And?" she pressed gently. He paused, not because he didn't know, but because the truth wasn't something he could give her. "I think we'll be okay," he said instead. Emily smiled, but it didn't fully reach her eyes this time. "Okay's safe," she replied, "but I don't want just okay forever." That sentence didn't create tension immediately. It didn't start an argument, but it introduced something new into the space between them, an expectation that hadn't been there before. Daniel didn't challenge it. He didn't dismiss it either. He simply stored it, the same way he had stored every look, every pause, every subtle shift. Because by then, something had already begun forming in his mind, not out of fear, but out of instinct shaped by everything he had lived through. He needed certainty, not the kind people speak about, but the kind that reveals itself under pressure. And pressure had not yet truly entered their lives, but it would, and when it did, Daniel already knew exactly how he was going to introduce it. The decision didn't come suddenly. It had been forming quietly, shaped by every look Emily didn't realize she gave, every question she thought was harmless, every pause that lingered just a second too long. By the time Daniel finally acted, it didn't feel impulsive. It felt inevitable. He didn't wake up one morning and decide to pretend to be broke. He built it step by step, the same way he built everything else in his life, with precision, patience, and control. The first move was small enough to pass without suspicion. He came home one evening, dropped his keys on the table, and exhaled just a little heavier than usual. Emily looked up immediately. "Long day?" she asked. Daniel nodded, loosening his shirt slightly. "We lost a client," he said. The words were simple, believable, and delivered without exaggeration. Emily's brows pulled together slightly. "Is that bad?" she asked. "It's not great," Daniel replied, "but I'll figure it out." She nodded, accepting it without pushing further. That was the first test, not of loyalty, but of reaction. She didn't panic. She didn't blame. She simply adjusted. And for a moment, Daniel almost questioned whether the test was necessary at all. But experience had taught him something dangerous. Loyalty doesn't reveal itself when things go wrong once. It reveals itself when things go wrong repeatedly. The second move came 2 weeks later. This time, it was a salary cut. He sat across from her at dinner, quieter than usual, letting the silence stretch just enough before speaking. "They're restructuring," he said. Emily looked up, immediately alert. "What does that mean?" "It means I'm still employed," Daniel replied carefully, "but I'll be earning less for a while." The words hung between them. Emily didn't respond right away. She picked up her fork, then set it down again, her appetite fading in real time. "For how long?" she asked. "I don't know yet," Daniel said. That part was intentional. Uncertainty creates pressure faster than bad news. Emily leaned back slightly, exhaling. "Okay," she said after a moment. "We'll adjust." The words were right, supportive, steady, but her tone carried something new, something beneath the surface. Concern, mixed with calculation. Daniel noticed it immediately, even though he gave no sign. The third step was where the shift began to take shape. Bills started arriving closer together. Expenses that had always been manageable suddenly required discussion. Daniel stopped using his car as often, casually mentioning fuel costs. Then, one evening, he said it plainly. "I think we need to cut back for a while." Emily didn't argue, not directly, but that night, she scrolled through her phone longer than usual, her expression distant, her attention elsewhere even as Daniel spoke. "It's temporary," he added, watching her closely. "Things will stabilize," she nodded, but her eyes didn't fully meet his. "They have too," she said quietly. Days passed, and the pattern deepened. The warmth that once filled their conversations began thinning out, replaced by shorter responses, longer silences. She still smiled, but less often. She still listened, but not as closely. And Daniel, standing inside the life he had carefully constructed, began to see the results forming faster than he expected. Because the pressure he introduced wasn't just testing their situation, it was testing her perception of him. And perception, once it starts to change, rarely goes backward. One evening, as he placed another unopened bill on the table, Emily looked at it, then at him, her expression harder than before. She didn't speak immediately, but when she finally did, her voice carried a weight that hadn't been there before. "Daniel," she said slowly, "is this really the best you can do?" Daniel didn't answer Emily immediately, not because he didn't hear her, but because he was watching her face instead of her words. Her question had landed differently this time, not like concern, not like confusion, but like judgment. "Is this really the best you can do?" The silence that followed stretched longer than usual, filling the small apartment like a tightening rope. Daniel slowly placed the unopened bill on the table. His movements were calm, deliberate, controlled, the kind of calm that came from a man who had learned long ago that reactions reveal more than words ever could. "I'm doing everything I can," he said finally. Emily exhaled sharply through her nose, shaking her head. "That's what you always say." There was no shouting, no raised voice, but something had changed in her tone. A quiet impatience had started replacing patience itself, and Daniel noticed it. Always. That night, after she went to bed earlier than usual, Daniel remained in the living room alone, the dim light of a single lamp casting long shadows across the walls. He didn't check his phone immediately. He already knew what was waiting there. Instead, his mind replayed the last few weeks not as memories, but as patterns, a shift in her tone when she spoke about money, longer pauses before she responded to him. The way she started dressing differently when she went out alone, not drastically, but noticeably, enough for someone like him. Deep foreshadowing begins. Days earlier, Daniel had seen something he didn't mention. Emily standing outside a cafe, speaking to someone on the phone, her expression softer than it had been with him in weeks. When she noticed him watching from across the street, she quickly turned away. And that speed mattered. Because guilt always moves faster than honesty. Back in the present, Daniel leaned back slowly on the couch, eyes half-lidded as he processed another memory, a small one, almost insignificant, but still telling. Emily laughing at her phone late at night, then suddenly locking the screen when he entered the room. "Just social media," she had said. But Daniel had noticed the timing. He always noticed timing. The next morning, the tension had grown thicker without either of them acknowledging it. Emily stood in front of the mirror, adjusting her hair longer than usual. "You're going out?" Daniel asked casually. She paused just slightly. "Yes," she replied. "Just meeting a friend." A pause, a beat too long. "Which friend?" he asked, not sharply, just gently. Her reflection didn't meet his eyes immediately. "Someone from work," she said. Then she added quickly, "Nothing serious." But Daniel caught it, the correction, the unnecessary reassurance, the emotional overcompensation, all signs he had learned to decode long before this marriage. Later that day, Daniel made a call. Not emotional. Not reactive. Strategic. A private investigator, someone he had worked with years ago under different circumstances. "I want quiet observation," Daniel said calmly. "No interference, just patterns, The voice on the other end didn't ask questions. Men like Daniel didn't need explanations, only confirmation. That evening, Emily returned home later than usual. Not dramatically late, but late enough for silence to feel heavier when she walked in. She didn't look at him right away. Not fully, just briefly. Then avoided his gaze completely. "You didn't call," she said lightly, dropping her bag. "I didn't think I needed to," Daniel replied. A pause, then she nodded. But something in her expression didn't settle. It hovered, like a thought she refused to complete. That night, as Daniel lay beside her again, he noticed something new. She wasn't turned away completely anymore. She was facing upward, eyes open, staring at the ceiling. Thinking. Calculating. And Daniel understood something with chilling clarity. The test was no longer one-sided. Because while he was watching her, she had started evaluating him too. The distance between Daniel and Emily was no longer something unspoken. It was something they both lived inside. It showed in the mornings first. No more shared routines. No more small conversations while preparing to leave. Just silence, structured, careful silence, like both of them were avoiding breaking something that was already cracked. That morning, Emily left earlier than usual. She didn't say where she was going, not because she refused to tell him, but because she didn't feel the need to anymore. And that realization landed in Daniel's mind like a slow, controlled impact. Not explosive, just finalizing. Daniel stayed behind longer than usual, sitting at the edge of the bed after she left, staring at the indentation where she had been moments earlier. His phone vibrated. A message from his private investigator. No words yet, just a confirmation of surveillance initiated. Daniel locked the screen immediately. He didn't need updates yet, he needed patterns. And patterns take time. That evening, Emily returned with a different energy. Not guilty. Not nervous, but lighter. To light. She dropped her keys on the table and hummed softly under her breath as she moved around the apartment. Daniel noticed immediately that contrast, because for weeks she had been heavy. Tired. Withdrawn. But now something had shifted again. "Good day?" Daniel asked casually. She paused just slightly before answering. "Yes," she said. "Productive." Another pause. Then she added, "I needed that." Daniel watched her carefully. Needed what? Emily hesitated for a half a second. Too long. "Just space," she said finally. And smiled, but not at him. Through him. That night, Daniel stepped outside briefly, under the excuse of clearing his head, but it wasn't air he was looking for. It was distance. Clarity. Perspective. And that was when he saw it. Across the street. Emily. Standing under the soft glow of a cafe sign, talking to someone. A man, not close enough to hear, but close enough to read. Her posture was different. Relaxed. Open. The way she used to be with him. Daniel didn't move. He didn't react. He simply observed and stored. Then the man laughed. Emily smiled, a real smile, not the polite kind she now gave him at home. Something inside Daniel tightened slightly. Not jealousy. Not anger, but confirmation. Deep, foreshadowing. Intense. A face and memory surfaced immediately. Weeks earlier, Emily had once mentioned casually, "I used to feel lighter before everything became so complicated." Daniel had brushed it off then, but now, that sentence returned with weight, because complicated had a source, and Daniel was beginning to suspect it wasn't just money anymore. Back in the present, Emily stepped back from the man in the cafe, glancing at her phone. The man said something else. She laughed again. Then turned away and walked in the opposite direction. Not toward home. Not immediately. Daniel waited until she disappeared into the crowd before stepping back into the shadows. His face remained unreadable, but inside, something irreversible had begun forming. Because now, the test wasn't just about whether she would stay during hardship. It was about what or who she was choosing instead. And Daniel Carter had built his entire life on one principle. Nothing stays hidden forever. not even love. Daniel didn't confront Emily immediately. That was never his method. He observed first, then confirmed, then acted. But that night, something inside him felt different. Not anger, not panic. Something colder. Understanding forming to early. Emily came home late again. Same pattern. Same silence. But this time, she didn't even try to explain. She walked past Daniel, dropped her bag, and headed straight to the bathroom. Like he was part of the furniture. Not a person to respond to. Just, they. Daniel watched her without speaking. Then said quietly, "You're coming home later these days." Emily paused at the bathroom door, turned slightly. "Yes," she said. "I told you I need space." Daniel nodded slowly. "Space from me?" A beat. Too long. Then, from everything, she replied. And closed the door. That answer stayed in his mind longer than it should have. Everything. Not him specifically. Not the marriage. Everything. That ambiguity was not comfort. It was avoidance. And Daniel knew avoidance always pointed somewhere. Later that night, Daniel reviewed a message from his investigator. One line stood out. Subject observed multiple meetings at cafe location. Consistent timing. Same individual present twice. No conclusions. Just pattern. Daniel stared at it for a long time. Then locked the phone. Flashback hit again. Emily, once saying softly during their early marriage, "I hate feeling controlled." Even a little. Back then, it sounded like honesty. Now it felt like foreshadowing. The next morning, Daniel decided to change nothing outwardly. That was important. Pressure only reveals truth when it's sustained. So he played his role. Same apartment. Same financial struggles. Same calm expression. But internally, the test had changed direction. He was no longer just observing loyalty. He was measuring replacement. That evening, Emily came out dressed differently. Not formal. Not casual. Intentional. Daniel noticed instantly. Going out again? He asked. Emily avoided his eyes. "Yes, same friend." A pause. Then, "Yes, to fast. To rehearse." Daniel stepped closer slightly. Not aggressive. Just present. "Emily," he said calmly, "are you happy?" She froze for half a second. That was enough. Then she smiled faintly. "I'm fine," and left. That answer didn't land like before. Because now Daniel understood something important. Fine is what people say when the truth is already elsewhere. That night, he didn't sleep. He sat alone in the dark living room, replaying everything: the cafe, the laughter. The timing, the avoidance, the shift. And for the first time since starting the test, Daniel asked himself a question he had avoided from the beginning. What if the test is no longer revealing her loyalty? Daniel didn't wait anymore, not because he was angry, but because waiting had started feeling like avoidance. That evening, he came home earlier than usual. Emily was already there, sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone with a calm expression that no longer tried to include him in her world. "Emily," Daniel said quietly. She looked up slowly. "Yeah." A pause. Then he asked, "Who is he?" The words didn't land loudly. They didn't need to. Emily's finger stopped moving on her phone. Just for a second. Then she exhaled and leaned back. "So this is what this is about." Daniel didn't respond. He didn't confirm. He didn't deny. He just waited. That silence was enough. Emily set her phone down carefully, like she had been preparing for this moment longer than he realized. "There's no him the way you think," she said finally. Daniel stepped closer. "Then explain what I saw." A flicker passed through her face. Not guilt, not fear, frustration. "You saw me talking to someone," she replied. "That doesn't mean what you think it means." Daniel's voice stayed controlled. "Twice, same place, same timing." Emily stood up now, her tone sharper. "So you're following me?" That question shifted the air. Not because it was false, but because it confirmed something. Daniel didn't deny it. And that silence answered more than words could. Emily shook her head slowly. "I can't live like this," she said. "This constant watching, questioning, suspicion." Daniel's eyes narrowed slightly. "Suspicion didn't start this. A pause. Then, it started when you changed, he added. Emily laughed softly, but it wasn't humor. I changed. Daniel, look at our life. She gestured around the room. The small apartment. The quiet tension. The absence of certainty. You think I don't feel it? She continued. Every day it's something new. Lost clients. Less money. Stress. Silence. And you just expect me to pretend I'm okay forever. Daniel didn't move, because that was the first time she had fully said it. Not him. Not the relationship. The life. Then she said it. The line that shifted everything. I met someone who makes things feel simple. Again, silence. Not immediate reaction. Just stillness. Daniel absorbed the words slowly. Not breaking. Not reacting. Just registering. Simple. He repeated quietly. Emily hesitated. It's not what you think. But Daniel raised his hand slightly. Not to stop her. Just to pause the noise. Is it emotional? He asked calmly. She didn't answer immediately. That delay said enough. Daniel nodded once. Slowly. Like something had clicked into place. Not betrayal yet, but direction. Understanding. Then he said something unexpected. I see. That confused her. You see what? She asked. Daniel looked at her properly now. Not as a husband, not as a man pretending to be broke, but as the man behind it all. I see where this test is going, he said quietly. Emily frowned. What are you talking about? Daniel didn't answer. Instead, he picked up his phone, unlocked it, and looked at her one last time. Not with anger. Not with heartbreak. But with certainty, because the test had finally reached its edge, and what came next would no longer be about pretending. The room felt different now. Not louder. Not quieter. Just finished. Daniel stood by the table, phone still in his hand, while Emily watched him with confusion slowly replacing frustration. What test? She asked again, her voice lower now. Daniel, what are you talking about? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked at her the way a man looks at something he once believed in completely, before learning what it truly was. Then he spoke. Everything you've lived for the past months wasn't random. Emily frowned. What are you saying? Daniel unlocked his phone and turned it toward her. A single notification lit the screen. $3,200,000. Transfer confirmed. Emily blinked. Once. Then again. Her breath caught slightly. What is that? She whispered. Daniel stepped closer, slow and controlled. That, he said quietly, is what I earned before I decided to stop being who you thought I was. Silence dropped instantly. Heavy. Unavoidable. Emily shook her head slightly. No, you said you were struggling. We've been living a lie. Daniel finished calmly. She froze. He didn't raise his voice, didn't rush. He simply continued. I wasn't struggling, Emily. A pause. I was observing. Her eyes widened slightly. Observing what? Daniel held her gaze. You. The words hit differently now. Not emotional. Not defensive. Final. Emily stepped back slightly. So all of this, the bills, the losses, the apartment, was fake. Daniel nodded once. Controlled, he corrected. Not fake. Controlled. Conditions reveal truth. Her voice cracked slightly. You tested me. Yes, he said. No hesitation. No apology. Just truth. Emily's hands trembled slightly now. You think I failed? Daniel paused. This time, longer. Then he answered. I think you chose comfort when pressure entered, he said. And that tells me everything I needed to know. Her eyes filled instantly. I stayed in the beginning. Yes, Daniel replied. When it was light. When it was easy. When you believed there was something to gain by staying. That sentence landed hard, not as accusation, but as reflection. Emily shook her head again. Tears now forming. That's not fair. Daniel's voice softened slightly, but only slightly. Fair, he repeated. Fair is believing someone loves you without conditions. A pause. Then, I learned long ago what happens when conditions change. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Daniel added the final truth. I am not broke. Emily, silence. I never was. Her breathing stopped slightly. the weight of it finally settling. He continued, I built everything you never saw, because I needed to know if I could be loved without it. A pause. And now I know. Emily's voice was barely audible. So what now? Daniel looked at her, not with hatred, not with anger, but with closure. That depends on the truth you want to live with, he said. Then he picked up his jacket and walked toward the door. Before leaving, he paused. Not turning back, just speaking one last time. You didn't fail because you left, he said softly. You failed because you changed when you thought I had nothing left. A beat, then the final line. And now that I have everything again, I finally understand who stayed for me, and who stayed for survival. The door opened. Light from outside spilled in. Then he left. And for the first time in months, silence in that room wasn't tension. It was truth.